Making a conscientious decision to move towards the promise of progress is a decision that one makes after careful and thoughtful consideration. Once the decision has been made, hopefully, of course, it benefits all of us in terms of making significant and meaningful progression towards those bridges of unity we so often aspire to. However, if you currently take the pulse and temperature of America, you'll quickly see that Americans are painting a pessimistic tone about the future of the country, according to new research published by the Pew Research Center, which found 77% of all Americans believe that the nation is more politically divided than ever before, which affects our ability to make tangible progress towards an acceptable and compromising middle. Which begs the question, is it still possible to find an acceptable middle ground where we can all make progress and have vigorous debate? One person with an interesting perspective on the matter is Rick Walker, who's proven himself to be a trusted leader when it comes to leadership, purpose, and direction across multiple domains and platforms in business, philanthropy, and politics. His experience includes more than 2 decades being a CEO and scaling a company to over 400 employees. He's also helped the nonprofit sector see significant growth, and he's a former congressional candidate. He's had the opportunity to interview movers and shakers from every facet and sector of the professional arena, from senators to congressmen to billionaires and multi-successful entrepreneurs as well. Through his podcast, Conversations at the Mansion with Rick Walker, he has the opportunity to dive deep into some of the most consequential and influential issues of the day, from life, politics, philosophy, and so much more. And he stopped by the program today to give his hot take and in-depth opinion on just how much progress the world has made in today's society towards that one more perfect union, and how far our divisions have to heal before we can stitch the country back together. This was an intriguing and thought-provoking conversation, which I'm happy to share with you all now. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to be with you today to talk to you about your life in business, politics, and everything in between, my friend. Great to see you this morning, and happy Thursday to you.
Happy Thursday to you too as well, Kevin. great to be with you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Now, Rick, I know you're a former congressional candidate, so I'm curious to get your sort of state of America and whether you think America can come back to sort of a more common middle ground where we can get things done while also having vigorous debate. I wonder your thoughts there.
Great question, Kevin. I don't think I've had an in-depth political conversation in probably 5 or 6 years, so I'll find this interesting. I think it was Chesterton that said that the ideal arrangement for politics is that all politics should be local, that you should keep politicians near enough to kick them. And I think that's really what's missing in today's political flavor, is that they become too disaggregated from their local voting base. Right, there's a lot of folks that are able to fundraise outside of their districts, outside of where they're based, and so there's people from outside the districts that are funneling money and funneling influence into these political districts. Now, I think also there's this idea as well that the more extreme someone is, the more likely they are to get elected. I don't know where this idea came from, but it seems to be working in both political parties. That the more extreme that I can get, I can move either farther left or farther right, and I can separate myself. I can get the attention, and attention is what they're really grabbing after right now. So how do we solve this? I think we have to convince the politicians that are in office that historically, and they have to see that historically, the only reason why ideologues win in the long term is if they have standing armies, right? The only ideologues throughout history that have won have been those who are able to come and effectuate their demands and their ideas on the population base directly through military force. And these are not the politicians that we have. And so they should not try to do this. They should not try to become ideologues and really disassociate themselves with reality. And if they do that, whether we're liberals or conservatives or independent or something else, we're going to work against them and get them out of office, because we need politicians that are willing to make practical, reasonable steps to move the community forward, not trying to aim for a dystopian society that will never come to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Rick, just building on that, I'm also curious to get your sort of pulse of the state of America society today, and whether you think people are better off today than they were about 5 or 6 years ago. And how do you think America is faring today, if you had to give it a report card of sorts?
Well, that's a tricky question, because I'm a guy that's focused on the economy, on business, and how real estate functions. That's my natural proclivity of interest is how the real estate market functions. So from that perspective, I see that there was an ascent from somewhere around 2013 all the way to around, I guess it would be around 2021. But it seemed to be a bubble. It seemed to be a bubble not only in commercial real estate, but also other areas of the economy. People were being very, I guess, generous, very wasteful with their spending. And I think that over the last year or two, that's really come home to roost economically. And I don't think that I don't consider it to be a political statement. I think we would be in a similar economic situation despite whoever was in the White House. I don't think anyone in the White House really could have prevented what we're seeing now. And so economically, I do not think we're better off over the last 6 years because the last year and a half or 2 years were just abysmal. Again, that's not a political statement, Kevin. That's just a statement of fact. That I don't think it's not a statement against Biden or for Trump. It's a statement that even if Trump was in the White House over the last 2 years, I think we'd have basically the same economic situation. Now, I think the bigger thing to worry about is where we are from a moral standpoint as a community, and as a community that's holding our politicians accountable. We've seen a lot of political declines in morality. In my home state of Texas, we've recently, we indicted, the state house indicted a sitting member of the House of Representatives for raping a minor during the session recently. We've now indicted a statewide office holder who is the Attorney General for 20 different counts. Whether they're true or not, I don't know. But I can tell you morality is on the decline in general. And that's something we need to pay more specific attention to, because it's the morality of the population and their integrity and their fortitude that's going to hold the politicians accountable. And if the politicians aren't held accountable, they're going to continue to lust and to seek after power and do anything, whether it's in our interest or not in our interest, to hold on and maintain that power.
Yeah, and Rick, from the lens that you're coming from a business perspective, my friend, because I know you've been in the entrepreneurial space for about 2 decades now. I'm curious about what's the biggest and best lesson you've learned sort of in your business or nonprofit sort of sector of your life, and how big of a role do you think those two entities specifically have to play in sort of moving the needle of progress forward as well?
Wow, what a great question, Kevin. That's a very deep question that I would venture to say you and I could probably spend an hour discussing. Let me try to keep it very, very simple, because I'm a very simple person. The rules and principles that you use to lead people through various organizations can be applied both in business and in nonprofit, as well as in politics. Now, the difference is that in business, you have an economic scorecard. You've got a bank account, and you have a balance sheet where you can keep score, you can track score. In a nonprofit, you really can't do that. So you have to come up with some other sort of scorecard, whether it be meals that you fed to the homeless, or orphans that were adopted, or some derivative of that. You eventually want to come up with a scorecard by which you track whether or not you're heading in the right direction or not. Politics is interesting, because politics is so heavily influenced by money. What you see is in the business world, the people that accrue wealth in the business world that are successful, and I'll get to why they're successful here in a second, they're able to trade the money that they win in business for power in politics, right? That's why money is so seductive, but it's also so useful, that it can be traded. It is fungible. I can take money and convert it into food. I can take money and convert it into medicine for the sick. I can take money and I can use it to motivate people to work harder and to become and grow into the people that they were meant to be. I can do a lot of things with money, but some people will also use that money, Kevin, to be able to buy political influence. And you go back to the 1400s and the 1500s in Italy, specifically in Florence, and you see this ascendance of the Medici family, where they were historically bankers, and they turned that banking craft over a period of about 300 years to building a machine that influenced politics and influenced wars and armies, and hired armies to go and do their bidding throughout Italy and beyond. And you see this come to fruition, where at one point, I believe it's in the late 1400s, early 1500s, where the son and the nephew of Lorenzo de' Medici eventually both become popes. This is a banker who's controlling states and controlling city-states and controlling kingdoms, also appointing popes. And so you have a banker having influence over statecraft and the church simultaneously in the 1400s. Now, let me take a step back so that is the integration of not only business, but also politics and power. Let me take a step back to answer the first part of your question, Kevin, and I'll leave with this. Now, how do we get to the part where we're able to run successful organizations so that we can get to the point where we're able to help others? That's the goal here, right? We want to become successful so we can help others. We want to build a larger audience on a podcast to be able to help others. We do that through realizing there's 3 things that are required. competency, communication, and integrity. Competency, communication, and integrity. The competency comes through learning and failing. We can get into details on that later on if you find that interesting. The second thing, communication, that comes either through the natural oratory, or it can come through written communication, or it can come through some other derivative communication format. And thirdly, this idea of integrity, that who you and I are on camera, we must also be in private with our families, with our friends, in our communities, that if we don't have an aligned philosophy of who we are or who we aspire to be, then eventually chaos will reign in our lives and we'll never ascend to the types of people, the types of men and types of women we were called to be and we were created to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rick, I'm curious to dive into something you said about learning through failure because, I truly believe that life is a constant game of learning. And, one of the things that I believe is the day that you stop learning is the day that you fundamentally sort of die off because I believe that no matter how smart you are or how many degrees that you have, you can constantly learn something from somebody else. And I know through your podcast, you've been able to talk to politicians, millionaires and billionaires and business people and everyone in between. So tell me about learning through failure and sort of the greatest lesson that you've learned through the conversations that you've had.
Wow, great question, Kevin. So if there's one thing that I'm really good at, and that's failing. I fail a lot. I make a lot of mistakes. In fact, my wife likes to say, Kevin, that I'm wrong 90% of the time. And that might be true. That might be true. And I tell our team sometimes here at the office that we've got to try 10 things to find one thing that works. Like we have to embed this within our mentality that we're going to fail, but whenever we fail, we're going to reflect on why we failed. We're going to incorporate that into our next decision. And through decision loop after decision loop, feedback loop after feedback loop, we're going to slowly get better. And so as you could speed up the repetition and the feedback loops, you can learn faster. And the man or the woman that's willing to put themselves out there and fail often, but also to reflect on why they failed and learn and get better, that person over time is going to be able to accomplish more. I think it also has to do something with the perspective through which you look at life, right? So, we spoke a second ago about these types of people that all they want is power, and they go into business to get money to be able to take and convert it into political power or some other form of power, which I think we both agree is wrong, not because power is wrong, but the lust for power is wrong. It's not what you do that makes you holy or a person worthy of the greatest things. It's why you do it. It's your purpose. It's the reason why you do what you do that really sanctifies the thing that you do, the work that you do. And I think that it's also something having to do with how do we become the people that we were meant to be. I believe that, Kevin, you and I were created to do something special, and it could potentially be our life's work to figure out what that might be and then go and become that person. And that maybe it's not what you do, it's who you become is the calling of your life and my life. That we were called to do something, we were called to become someone. And that's the great query of life. Now, some of the interviews we've done have been with really interesting people, U.S. senators, city members of Congress, members of the president's cabinet, musicians, billionaires, people like that, and a lot of really interesting people. And so one common theme I've realized, Kevin, is that they don't take themselves too seriously. The people that are really good at what they do long term, they do not take themselves very seriously. I'll use one example. U.S. Senator Mike Lee out of the state of Utah, just a really, really sharp guy. We are on different spectrums religiously. But he is certainly a very moral man, a very, very good man, from everything I can tell. But he's also a very, very smart man. He's a smart man that's very acclimated to the laws and the history of America and the founders and the founders' intent. And he's seen as kind of a nerd. And so one of the things he has to do to break up this seriousness about him is he has to insert a little bit of humility and a little bit of humor. And I think you saw this a few years ago. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez submitted the new Green Deal through the Congress, and I think it had a lot of good intent for certain people. Like, it's great, we should take care of the environment, we should take care of this, that. It's just a matter of like how you do it, right? It's not what you do, it's why you do it. The intent was probably very good. And Mike Lee, though, took the floor of the Senate, and he brought up these big boards with these pictures on them, with these kind of fake pictures on them, and he envisioned a world where this was law. And a couple of things with the new Green Deal was that you couldn't have motorized engines, you couldn't have combustion engines anywhere, and you couldn't do certain things that would basically, it wouldn't allow you to have certain types of batteries, certain types of propellant systems. So you really couldn't get across the ocean. You really couldn't fly certain places. You couldn't have private planes. There were all these things you couldn't do. So transportation and mobility was greatly hindered. And so he came up with this great board that had a picture of Aquaman riding a velociraptor, that was the only legal way that they would be able to transverse the Atlantic, is using velociraptors. And so it got a few chuckles. But that's just one tool that someone like that uses to get people to really to see them as a person, not just as a big brain who is always theorizing, philosophizing about how things should be. And I think Mike Lee is a good example of that. Great guy. And some other things that I've seen as well is that I had a private meeting with a former U.S. president a while back, and you would think that the president would come in and talk about himself the whole time. There were nine people in the room. It was just phenomenal. And Kevin, he came in and he asked about us, like, what do you do? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. Where are they interested? What kind of sports? Didn't talk about himself for an entire hour. And I thought, well, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. The gifted politician must be able to build relationships and build one-on-one connections in order to build a coalition. That the coalition eventually becomes a larger voting bloc that eventually propels the person into the presidency or whatever their role is. And I think you saw this a lot with Obama and Clinton. These guys were masterful in working with people, but they were masterful because people liked them, because they generally like people. And you saw that in the way that Obama and Clinton greeted other people. Like, they were just magnificent with people on an individual level, and that led to greater heights of ascendancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Authentic human connection goes a long way, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Amen.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rick, I'm also curious to ask you about business longevity and sustainability in business. How do you think you succeed in today's entrepreneurial climate for the long haul? So how do you achieve business success in your view?
Well, I think when you think about longevity, you must also put into the same equation that the speed at which someone generally acquires wealth historically has been the speed at which they lose the wealth. So someone that gets lucky by throwing up a website or going viral on Twitter or social media, or maybe they get elected to an office at age 22 or whatever it might be, that person has the highest probability of losing what they've attained quicker. And you saw this in the problem with Madison Cawthorn, the gentleman that was elected to Congress. I think he was only there for one term, but he just had so many moral problems that he just could not be reelected, that he got there too fast. He he didn't have time to grow in the position. And I think business is also the same way, that you got to learn the little lessons. You have to learn the little struggles. You have to learn how to do your own accounting before you can hire an entire accounting department to be able to run the books. It's not that it's necessary for those things to happen. It just seems like, Kevin, like that's the way the world works. That you have to understand how to do the small thing in order to understand how all the small things function together and form the big thing. It's really philosophical, the way that I view this. Now, let's go back to this three-part. I call it a confluence. Like rivers come together and they form greater rivers. It's the confluence of competency and communication and integrity. I think that if you have those three things, you can have business in the long term. You can have an organization in the long term. You can have a long-term political history. You can have a long-term YouTube channel that's worthy to be watched and to be viewed. And you certainly have done this. And I really admire the work that you've done, Kevin. I mean, really, really great questions. I think some of the best questions I've ever been asked have come from this podcast. Really, really great, deep questions. And the competency and the communication are the two things that the aspiring business leader, the aspiring politician, the aspiring, I guess, the person that wants to go viral focus on. They focus on the communication first and the competency, but then they leave the integrity. They leave the third thing because they think they can fake it. They think it's only about what you see. And for the wise man, the wise woman, you can see through whether or not the other party's wise. It's not that you can tell by their gestures or their mimics or how they handle themselves or how they communicate. It's something deeper than that. And we have to understand that if we're going to be building sustainable organizations and long-term organizations, we have to have all three of these things in balance. But the why, we're going to go back to the why. The why you do those things, why you become competent, why you build your communication skills, why you focus on becoming the man or woman that's worthy of being respected or being followed, this integrity thing, it's the why. And the why you do it has to be from a nature of service to your community, service to your team, service to your family, service to your friends. And if you get the why right, then the three things will be done for the right reasons: the competency, the communication, and integrity. And from there, you build really a platform through which you can build a great organization, you can build a great podcast, you can build the thing that you're called to build.
Yeah, and you talk about building a great organization, Rick. You know, one of the things that I do outside of hosting this podcast is I work with organizations to amplify their hiring of folks with disabilities, because, you know, I was born with cerebral palsy myself, and, you know, it's personal for me, Rick, because I found out at the age of 9 that I wouldn't be able to walk without assistance. And I always tell businesses, by infusing folks with disabilities into the workforce, they can create a competitive advantage. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the idea of inclusion in the workplace and society at large for folks with disabilities and other marginalized groups as well.
Oh, wow, what a great question. So my father is a disabled veteran. So this is very, very close to home. And I think one of the things that the federal government did to help my father and other people in that position was that they created this Service Disabled Veteran-owned business program where they help them they don't give them handouts, but they help them be able to compete for certain opportunities to do business with the federal government and other agencies. And that's the sort of thing that I think that we need to be focused on as we look to help people that are not given all the rights and opportunities. Is that the best thing we can do is offer someone an opportunity. The opportunity then there needs to be some competition. So, right, you don't necessarily want to hand things out. What you want to do is provide an equal platform, an equal footing through which there can be some sort of competition, because the competition is for some of us is what what gives meaning to life is that you got to have a little bit of energy, a little bit of fuel, and the game of competition is what drives a lot of us whenever we're without a purpose or without knowing what we should do. Now, for myself, I've always found that building an organization that is diverse, where we have a diversity of political ideologies, diversity of racial and ethnic folks in the organization, a diversity of people that have different disabilities within the organization. That if you can build an organization with all those components, right? You also want a diversity of skills, right? You don't want a company full of accountants or full of marketing people. It's just destructive. But if you can build an organization that has all these diversities and they're somehow interwoven, that not only is there beauty in the texture, there's beauty in the texture of that, but there's also a strategic advantage in that if I can learn from Kevin about his perspective on life, it'll help me with my own perspective on life. And if I can learn what it was like to maybe grow up in Mexico from another coworker and the struggles there and the challenges there, maybe it can help me deal with my own struggles, my own challenges. That they're different, but I can take them out of one context and I can apply them in another context. And so I think there's a strategic advantage through having a diversity of people in your organization, people in your life, while also it being somewhat of a beautiful thing. That there's this, let me put it this way. Have you ever seen Rembrandt's painting of the Sea of Galilee by any chance, Kevin?
Yeah, online, yeah.
Yeah. It was Rembrandt's only seascape, and it's this interesting painting. It's the painting of the storm on the Sea of Galilee, and you've got it's the biblical story where you've got Jesus and the disciples all on the boat, and it's as a storm starting to break in, and the peace is starting to break in, and it's commonly referred to as the most striking, most beautiful, most meaningful waterscape in all of history. And there's one point in that picture that's the most beautiful point classically. It's a point where there's a little bit of purple and there's a little bit of yellow breaking through the storm clouds. It's the point at which Christ says, "Peace, be still," and the the sunshine starts breaking through the storm clouds. And that's the picture that Rembrandt captures there. And so the most beautiful part, the purest part, the part that's easiest, that makes you happiest, this yellow purplishness up in the sky, is like the easy part to look at, is the happy part to look at. But you would never know what the happiness and the easiness is without the context within the painting, because you must also have the storm in order to know the beauty of the sky and the peace. If you don't know what the war and the struggle is, you'll never appreciate the peace. And this diversity of perspective, not diversity in the color of our skin or whether or not we have certain disabilities or certain advantages, but the diversity of nature is also another way of looking at this, that if we can become the types of people that see the texture of the beautiful and the ugly in the same picture, the beautiful and ugly in the painting of Rembrandt, the person that has the perfect mental capacity with the person who can't quite think right. You can see that the partnership of those two, there's beauty in that partnership. And I speak as one from experience. I'll leave you with this, Kevin. I had a procedure a few years ago to fix an issue with a carotid artery here. And when I woke up, and that artery provides blood flow to the brain, blood flow to the face. And when I woke up, I just wasn't thinking right. I mean, I wasn't crazy, but I couldn't think at full speed. I was just thinking slowly. And it took me a couple of years to really get back to where I could process correctly. And those couple of years gave me a little bit of perspective of what it may be like to not be able to process at full speed. And it's one of those things that helps you appreciate the perspective of others, regardless of their background, their disabilities, their abilities, and also their perspective. And so I don't know if that helps answer your question there. I kind of roamed there a little bit, Kevin, but that's just really how I see that really coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick, as we edge closer to an election year in 2024, I'm also curious to ask you about lowering the political tension in America. Going back to some of our earlier discussion points, because I think we've sort of got lost politically in a sense in America, where we can't have robust discussion without becoming so territorial and having to go to one side or another. So I'm wondering your thoughts on how we lower sort of the political tension in America, and whether you think the Republican Party can get back to sort of a governing middle, which will allow them to win elections.
Wow, great question. So let me answer your last question first, because I think it's the simplest. I think historically we've seen the national politics have ebbed and flowed. They've moved back and forth over cycles. Sometimes the cycle is 4 years, sometimes the cycle is 12 years, but they've ebbed and flowed. And I think why it ebbs and flows is that there's problems with both parties, right? There's intrinsic problems with both of them, and this middle of the country, this voting base that may shift it one way or another, are the ones that see that, and they can actually see the mistakes, and the mistakes not only in the ideologies but also in the execution of the political ideologies by both parties. And so I think the mistakes will be continuous, and this ebb and flow will continue long term. Now, with a lot of the ideology that I alluded to earlier, and this fractionality that we have in America, I think we've got to go back and look at some of the wisdom writers of old. I think specifically of Moltmann, who said that the question about whether God blesses America will not become apparent until it emerges whether America is a blessing to the rest of the world. That if we're to receive the blessing of God, right, there's nothing high. You can only be blessed by something that's higher. If I'm broke, I can only be blessed by someone that has money. If I am a slave or I'm a prisoner, I can only be blessed by the judge that's higher than me. You can only receive that which you need from something or someone that's higher. The only thing that's higher than America is God, in my perspective. And so if God's going to bless America, there's no one else that's going to bless us. There's no one else that's going to bless us. And it's got to be because we've got the why line, just kind of what Moltmann's getting at, that we've got our whys aligned. And what is the purpose of America? He's saying that the purpose of America is to bless the world. Now, notice he doesn't say of how we're to do that. That we're not just meant to be taxed 100% and for all of our wealth to be distributed all over the world. I think that's what made a lot of people upset by the arms and the funding that we've been sending to Ukraine most recently. But there's another way to bless the world, and that is by being the men and women that are maximally possible. So let me envision for you for a second, Kevin, like, what's the best type of man? What's the best type of woman? Is it better to be stingy, or is it be better to be open-handed and to give freely to your neighbors, to give freely to the people in Ukraine that are hurting, give freely to the people in South Korea that have come across the border from North Korea? Is it better to be the type of man that sits around and watches TV all day, or the type of man that jumps on a podcast to see if he can get a nugget of wisdom that then he can disseminate among to his friends? Is it better to be the type of man who, when he goes into battle, runs away from the battle or storms into the battle? It's better to be the courageous man. Is it better to be the type of man that fights so that he might win a peerage, he might win an award or get a disability check? Or is it better to be the type of man that goes and fights in the war because he loves that which is behind him, not because he hates that which is in front of him? Right? We all know what the best type of man is to be, and the best type of nation to be is that type of man, the type of nation that goes out, not only helps the people in our own community. We've got tons of social issues, and I'm so blessed to know people like you, Kevin, who are willing to go out there and help people across a diverse number of spectrums become better. But we also have to realize that we're also called to help the world around us, that we should also be the types of people that help the people that are struggling across the world. And we should do that through the platform of charity, of nonprofit, whether it be working through your local mosque or your local church or your another type of organization like the Red Cross. We have the ability to be able to go and help those people. And the type of people that are blessed are the type of people that go and bless others who have no opportunity of repaying them. The type of people, I'm going to repeat that, the type of people that are blessed most are people that go and help the type of people that could never have the opportunity to repay them. That's why anonymous giving could be the most powerful tool that anyone could ever use to change their lives. And that's what Moltmann's saying. He's saying that America, who is the highest of all the nations, that if we go and we bless the other nations that have problems, that need help, that if we go and bless them, both through the federal government, but also mainly through our own individual charity, that somehow that cascading of blessing will be done at a higher level. By God will bless America. And if God blesses America, we should in response bless the other nations of the world. And that's how we get the country back on track. Let me add one other note, that this is something that the politicians have forgotten, that the central cornerstone of all of humanity has always been the family unit, I could not do what I do if I did not have a mother and a father who raised me and supported me. And I still have a mother. I think that everything I have is because I've got a mother who's been in a closet praying for me for 40 years. Like I really haven't done very much. But also because I have a wife and I've got children, and I'm in a community surrounded by love, who, whenever I'm down, others lift me up. And I'm sure that we've all experienced at one time, we can't do certain things, and we rely on the love and the benefit and the benevolence of others to lift us up. And that's what it means to be an American, but that also is what it means to be the type of person that takes care of those you're responsible for, the politician. So the politician must remember and keep center focus that the purpose of civilization is to protect the core family unit.
Rick, I have two questions left for you, and the first has to do with when people go to the voting booth in 2024, whether they vote because they're worried about the price of gas, or whether they're going to keep their kids safe in school from guns. What do you think the American voter should keep top of mind as we look to move America forward?
Yeah, great question. So I think you've got to. I think what you're talking about is exactly right. You have to be thinking about the things that are important to you and your family and the people that you love as most important. And I think that one of the, if you're thinking about within the context of topics or specific needs of the country, I think the ability to provide freedom and liberty and the protection of the innocent, that may be the better way to say that. I've always had this theory, Kev. I haven't flesh this out a whole lot over the years, but I've always had this theory that if we could elect the politicians who were not thinking of themselves when they voted, but were thinking of their grandkids, we would get better results. That if a politician could keep in mind and do everything under the banner of what's best for my grandkids, that all of a sudden that would also align with your interest and my interest, because the grandkids are not only the future, but they're also the most vulnerable. And the most vulnerable in society are always those historically that have taken the brunt of the weight of decisions. And you look at the debt load, for instance, right? Right. You and I, we're not going to repay the debt of America. It'll be kids and grandkids and great grandkids. It'll be future generations. We're throwing it all down the line, and we never do things that'll benefit the grandkids. We always do things that benefit ourselves, and that's what I think the voting population need to understand. That we need to find politicians that are thinking about the grandkids, not say they're thinking about the grandkids or the future generations of America, but really vote like that. And if we can do that, if we can find a handful of them, we can find more. And over time, we can get the right people in power and the right people in office.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Rick, my final question has to do with your greatest hope for America's future. And when you look at your own sort of professional and personal legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
Wow. So I believe there are two types of people, Kevin. I believe there are only two types of people in the whole world. Either you believe you're a body that happens to have a spirit, or you're the type of person who believes you're a spirit primarily that just happens to have a body. Those are the only two type of people on planet Earth. Either you believe body is primary or the spirit is primary. I would like to have, if I could have one wish in America, is for every American to answer that question. To answer that question truthfully to themselves. And if you're the type of person that believes the body is primary, that the natural world is primary, you will have a very limited perspective on what the possibilities of your life are, what the potential could be, and what you can accomplish through your life. And you also are the type of person that cannot realize that the highest things, the best things, are the things that you can't see. Love, which you can't see, is greater than lust, which you can see played out before your very eyes. Courage is higher than being afraid, like a child. The things that are higher are the things that are invisible. And so I would submit for your consideration that the true orientation of the person who's going to make a difference, not only in this life, but then after they're gone, it's going to have a lasting impact, is the person that realizes that you and I are primarily spirits that just happen to have bodies, that we will live forever. And if we will live forever, we will conduct ourselves in different ways, right? If I have a habit of looking at certain things online and I'm only going to live 100 years, well, that may only have a certain amount of damage if I live 100 years. But if I do that and I keep that same mentality, I let that grow over 1,000,000 years, if I'm going to live for 1,000,000 years, as the great C.S. Lewis said, that in the end I would become a devil. I would become the worst imaginable thing. And so that's why we have to look and take ourselves accountable and hold ourselves to the highest possible integrity, the highest possible morality. And that's the thing that we can do, because America is only a collection of Kevins and Ricks and Bobs and Steves and Marys and Janes, and a collection of all of us. And so you asked, like, what would I want my legacy to be if I could be remembered for one thing? I would say there are really four perspectives of this. So the first thing is what would the public, what would the community, what would the people that know me, think of me. I would wish that they would think of Rick as someone who's passionate, disciplined, and wise. Passionate, disciplined, and wise. Not that I'm all those three things, but I aspire to be those three things. I'd aspire to get better, become more passionate. I aspire to read the great wisdom literature and incorporate that in my thinking. And I aspire to be disciplined. Now, to my family, to my kids, I want to be thought of as the dad who loved his kids maximally. The dad that looked up his kids to be the maximal person that they could be. My three daughters. They can do anything they want to do. I want to challenge my kids with great questions like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? The great quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I want to challenge my kids with things like that. I want my kids to remember that. Now, with my wife, I want my wife to realize that I had no greater love than her, that she was the greatest gift of my life. And the final thing, the final legacy I want to leave is probably the greatest of all of them. The thing that I orient my entire life around is that not to intellectually know God, not to think about God and read the Bible and read all the great philosophers, understand what God is. That's not what I want to do. I want to do something greater than that, Kevin. I want to be known by God. I want to be known by God. It's the equivalent of looking at that masterpiece of Rembrandt and looking at the beauty and looking at the texture of it and seeing beauty through that painting, but not just to study it, but to see that painting can reflect beauty back into me, that it could change me, that I could understand things about the nature of texture, that I can understand what it means for the peace to come through the storm, that I can understand this little thing that Rembrandt put in there. You look at the boat, and I'm gonna leave you with this, Kevin. You look at this boat in this painting. I challenge everyone to go and look at this painting. And this boat has not 13 but 14 people on it. That there's not only the 12 disciples on this boat. This is a story out of the Bible of Jesus calming the storm. You expect to find 12 disciples in Jesus. You find 13 people on the boat, but there's 14 people on the boat. Well, why is that? The 14th person on the boat is Rembrandt. Rembrandt paints himself into the painting itself. He paints himself into a biblical story, and he's the figure, if you look toward the bottom of the boat, that's looking back out at you. He's looking back out at you, out of the painting. And what he's doing is something like what I'm talking about when I say that I want to be known by God. He's saying, join the great adventure. Join the great adventure of understanding how the order invades the darkness, invades the chaos, how light invades the darkness, how heaven invades earth, how the thing that we thought that we couldn't do becomes possible. The potential becomes concrete. That whatever you give away is what you keep. It's this big paradox. It's a paradox like the meek shall inherit the earth, that you will not ascend until you first descend, that only the hurt people can become great people. And I think it's something like that. And the reason why I know those things is not because they're technically true from a logical standpoint, although I think I could prove them all, but because I see the beauty in the paintings, I see the beauty in the literature, I see the beauty in who God is. And if we look at God with truth and beauty, he changes us somehow, some way. And I don't know how that is. And I wish that to be the pinnacle of my legacy.
Absolutely. And Rick, finally tell me, if people want to get connected with you, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Hey, Kevin, I love hanging out on Twitter. The handle across Twitter and YouTube and Facebook is all Rick Walker TX. Rick Walker TX. I do a little bit of a YouTube show. I'm not as consistent and I'm not as successful and and talented as Kevin is, but we do a little YouTube show that look at the various frameworks of what leadership is from the different perspectives of literature and business strategy and war strategy and the world religions. We look at all these things and how all those things kind of collide and create the world-class leader that you and I aspire to be.
Absolutely. Well, Rick, I want to thank you for ending or being a part of the tail end of my week to talk about leadership, politics, life, and everything in between, my friend. Your work in the space of conversation and leadership is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here this morning.
Kevin, thanks so much for the gift that you give us all every week as you put out this content. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for helping all of us, Kevin, become better people, become better leaders, become better Americans and even brothers as we look across and see what we can do for our fellow man. Thank you so much for your example.